Krishna Abid. I am the ambassador for the Bridge, Pakistan. Today, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with our grand winner of the first international writing competition on Flash Fiction. Now, before I introduce my guest writer for today's interview, let me first give you a quick overview of our unique platform, The Bridge. So The Bridge is basically a creative writing venture. It is based on the idea of connecting writers from all around the world and bringing them to a platform where they can showcase their abilities, they can showcase their work, and they can showcase their writings. This project offers multiple publishing opportunities, both online with our websites and with our local magazines. There are international contributors from all over the world, and it also engages writers into very exciting competitions every month. And these competitions are completely devoid of geographical, religious, ethnic, or any sort of social barriers or discriminations. Now, our distinctive project is one of its kind in the country, and it is initiated to encourage your emerging writers right now in the world with different ethnicities who love to write, who are interested in writing, devoid of any cultural differences. The project is expected to reach out to a very wide range of countries where the people can work with their power of pen, bring revolutionary changes, and push their societies towards betterment. Today, we have a very interesting and versatile personality. He is a journalist, a literary he's a literary critic, he's a novelist, and with all of that, he is a law graduate from SOAS London, Taha Kher. He is the author of two novels, Typically Tanya and Of Rift and Rivalry. He's the co-editor of The Stained Glass Window, Stories of the Pandemic in Pakistan, and he has written many essays and reviews on the commentaries that have been published. Am I missing something, Taha?
I guess this is fine. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Oh, you have also written short stories for The Bridge Volume 2.
Yes, I wrote one short story.
That's a very interesting CV. How are you, Taha?
I'm well. How are you? It's a pleasure to be here, as I said. And yeah.
It's a pleasure having you here. So, Taha, let's begin with our questions without further delay.
Yeah.
So I see that you have contributed to the Bridge anthology earlier too, and recently your short fiction got selected as a winner on the Bridge. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was very surprised.
I was not surprised. How was the experience of writing for the Bridge?
So I came to know about the Bridge last year because a dear friend of mine asked me to contribute. And at the time, I had no idea as to what this platform was all about. I did find it very intriguing that the Bridge dealt with synergies so well, where you were connecting writers from one part of the world with another part of the world. And though we live in an inherently globalized world, our world was shrinking almost because last year, as all of us know, the pandemic made each of our worlds very, very myopic, very, very insular, very, very small. And I think at a time like this, the idea of connecting with writers intrigued me most, which is why I contributed a story for the Bridge. And I believe the second volume was connecting Pakistani writers with writers in the US, which I thought was fascinating. And the theme was roots, which is a very complicated thing if you think about it in both Pakistan and in the US. So that fascinated me the most, yeah.
All right, so how did you started, what was the idea behind your first publication for the Bridge?
For the Bridge. So I was told about 15 days before about the deadline, and I knew that the theme was roots. It was fascinating because I instantly thought of Roots the novel, and what it made me think about was this idea of home, what we consider to be home, what we consider to be the foundation of our very lives. And the story I ended up writing, it was called The Incident. It was about a girl
Mm-hmm.
who comes back to Karachi after a very long, you know, time away. She's in the UK, and she returns to a world that is very different. She remembers leaving in a rush because of an incident that happened back in the 90s, where this girl who worked in their house and her mother, um, they were, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who wants to read it, but it basically ties in Karachi of the 90s, which was heavily, steeped in ethnic strife and violence, and connects it with our world at the moment. So this girl comes back with this notion of coming home, but uh, what she finds is not home. She finds a very warped sense of home, which is what I was interested in. I was fascinated with the idea, but I was equally shocked when it was selected because I didn't think it was my best work. I never usually write about home, but it was fun.
Isn't
I was
that what all writers think?
actually, yeah,
All
you're
right.
right. You're
Yeah. Please go on.
no, you continue.
All right, Taha, you have been a writer, and with that, you have edited, co-edited, and guest edited multiple anthologies and magazines. So, in your opinion, what is more challenging, editing or writing, or is there whatsoever no comparison?
So when I began, I was actually a writer. I was very young. I think I was 19, and I got my first editing job at 19. I was working at a newspaper, a magazine called Slogan. It was a very small media magazine. And when I started editing, I found it very difficult to write. And it was something that I don't know what it was. Maybe I became self critical. Maybe I thought, there's this editor's block that people don't talk about that much. We talk about writer's block like it's the most common thing in the world, but sometimes editors find themselves paralyzed because they can't put pen to paper. So I think writing is relatively easy. It's the editing that becomes a problem because it can actually hamper you in some ways. Because the most um, the most valuable feedback anyone would give you is edit your work, but sometimes even that process can be very grueling. It's not easy to determine when you put a stop to the editing and allow the writing to flow. So I think editing is challenging, though I would also argue that it depends on the project you're working on. But I think editing is still the most difficult, the most challenging.
Definitely, I would agree. I would agree. Have you been annoyed by any of the editors, or have you edited your books by your own self?
So I don't think I've ever had a bad experience with an editor. So my first novel was published with an Indian publication. It was called Palimpsest. It was a small independent press, and the editing process was very smooth. My second novel was with HarperCollins, and I think that was the most professional process I've gone through. Um, I think what we forget when it comes to editing is that it's a collaborative process. So anytime when you confront an editor who insists on heavily rewriting or heavily reworking your work, that's a bad editor. I think the most valuable editor, the most skilled editor is the one that assists you in writing your story by allowing your words to flourish, your voice to emerge. And I thankfully have not come across a bad editor yet. Life is long. One can come across all kinds of people. But I think this is going to be like, I think it's now 11 years since I've been doing this, and I haven't come across a bad editor. But I think I think the most difficult process is finding a good editor. Sometimes when it comes to my own work, I actually edit it significantly before I send it to a publisher. Therefore, usually it's in a pretty okay shape. I'm not going to say good shape because that's just, being too immodest, but it's all right. It can pass through the publication process. Yeah.
All right. Daha, I see that most of your work is basically short fiction, but you have recently finished a detective novel. So, can you please tell us something interesting about writing a novel
So
at
actually,
your
weirdly
age?
enough, yeah. So weirdly enough, I'm not a short story writer. I only write short stories on request. This is something I realized very recently when all the short stories, even the one I did for the bridge, was a request, a friend saying, "Okay, write it." But it's long form that really flows for me. Long fiction, any form of journalistic writing, and fiction. Novel writing is something that comes a little easier to me. Fiction is very difficult when it comes to short fiction. So, yes, I think my novel that you're talking about at the moment, the detective novel, it's more like a postmodern detective novel. It's again a novel that is set in Karachi, and the themes that I've explored primarily through my work have been Karachi past and present, and just life in Karachi, whether it's contemporary or it's viewed from a historical lens. It's pretty much Karachi because that's where I live, that's where I grew up, and that's the space, that terrain that interests me the most. So, yeah, I think when it comes to writing a postmodern detective novel, and that to one that's set in Karachi, I think it's very challenging because there is no one detective in the story. It's everyone is trying to figure something out, and everyone is trying to negotiate that reality of Karachi past and present. Each of them has been living there in the city for a while and have been heavily shortchanged by political circumstances, social situations, and each of them has a story to tell. So that's what this novel is all about. Let's see when it emerges. It's ready, but I think publishing has been a challenge because primarily I get do all my publishing in India, and that has been it's not really an option at the moment. So yeah.
All right. I wish you all the best for your novel, and we are very excited to read that. I think that was a very good teaser.
Yes, thank you so much for inserting that.
Now you have talked about challenges as in writing a novel, but what about the challenges as a writer generally? What are the challenges that you faced? What was your biggest challenge in your entire writing career?
I think self-doubt. Self-doubt is one thing we get paralyzed with as writers. And obviously, I say self-doubt, but it's actually more external. Why do you doubt yourself? Because someone tells you you're not good enough. I think as a writer, you have to be able to embrace the reality that you will be doubted, you will be questioned. And to come to that realization is it's difficult. It's difficult to say, okay, well, nobody likes my work. Well and good. I'll keep writing. I'll write something better. The beauty of writing is to keep failing at it. And you feel better, as Margaret Atwood says. So I think for me, it's always been realizing that, okay, I've written something, and it's a very big thing to put something down on paper. Very
Definitely.
few people can actually do it. If you can confront the blank page, you've done, half your battle is won. You've done the best you could have done. And then the rest of it depends on the reader. The rest of it depends on luck, kismat, takdir, everything. It's just that. And that's what writing is all about as well. Yeah.
Definitely, I completely agree with your point. But Taha, what an impressive CV you have, and you are a law graduate from SOS London, as we mentioned earlier, and you're also teaching media courses to the undergraduate students. And along with all of this, you are a published writer, mashallah. So, with all of this, how did you manage writing? What about your education? What do you do with your profession? Would you like to give us an insight about that?
So I primarily worked as a journalist soon after I graduated from law. school. And the reason why I did a law degree was because I deluded myself into believing that I could become a lawyer. I realized I didn't have the stamina to deal with uh, fellow lawyers because they were it was a cat eat cat, dog eat dog world. And I was someone who was a lot more, quiet. I preferred reading, and I think I realized later on that my interest in law was very academic. Therefore, I realized I ended up doing two dissertations at university. And I realized, okay, I'm clearly interested in the writing aspect of it. So let me get into something that allows me to hone and sharpen those skills, which is why I went into journalism. I worked at the Express Tribune, at the Peshawar City pages, and subsequently I went on to work at the op-ed pages of the news. And I realized that full-time journalism, while it was brilliant, it was paying well, it didn't give me much time to pursue my own writing, which is why I decided in February 2019 to go completely freelance. And that's when teaching happened. And so now I divide my time, as you very rightly pointed out, between teaching, between writing, between editing, and between doing freelance journalism. It's exactly what I wanted to do, I realize in retrospect. In a month, I churn out about 4 or 5 pieces. It isn't necessary that they will be fiction, but it's going to be nonfiction of some kind, and I'm satisfied with it. I think that's what it is. And I have to keep, trying to put that self doubt at bay. It's a process that one goes through every single day. So it's just that's the beauty of it.
Definitely. Do you think that writing is more of an inbuilt talent and has, as you said, so is it for everybody that it has nothing to do with your profession or your academic education? It's just an inbuilt talent that emerges.
So I do believe that there is a spark, there is something that makes you want to write, but there are very few people who can actually take that further. Not because they lack talent, but talent is actually just secondary when it comes to these things. Writing is perseverance. You have to be able to confront the empty page, and it's a combat initially. It's a, it's I'm not going to call it a race against time, but it's something that you have to do. It requires perspiration, it requires effort. So I believe very few people can put in that effort simply because there are so many things to do in a day. So there are lots of people who could make excellent writers, but they don't have the time to do it. I'm not even going to say the drive because some of them are writing in their minds all the time. But it's committing it to paper that can be a challenge because simply the lack of time, or sometimes they don't have the personal space to do it. Therefore, it is inbuilt talent. And uh, yes, it has very little to do with the profession you're in as well, because people like to say that, okay, if you want to become a writer, join creative writing classes. I've come across a lot of writers who had impeccable inbuilt innate talent, but they went to a creative writing course and their talent was hampered. They they were told they were not good enough. And that is something that creative writing classes can do sometimes. They can make or break a voice. Therefore, I would say suggest just keep doing what you do, keep writing. I think if you can take out even 15 minutes in a day to put something down on paper, you're a writer. That's how I see it.
That's a beautiful thought, and I'm sure it will encourage a lot of our viewers. Uh, Taha, tell me, we have been talking about your first position in the first international competition of the bridge, and you told us a brief overview of it. But what was the inspiration behind it? Was it solely Karachi, or did something else happen?
This is for the story that has won, or the story for the publication?
The short letter come story.
Oh yes, the short letter come story. There's obviously a preoccupation with death in the story, and as you can tell, it's written in a first-person narrative voice. So what I
Mhm.
usually do when I'm writing first-person narrative voice is I try not to sound too interior. The interiority is somewhat, I try to reduce it as much because you're already using a first person voice. So everything that is filtered through that first person voice is an inner voice. But sometimes we don't, sometimes we blot certain things out. Sometimes we don't talk about the things that are bothering us when we speak or we speak to people. In this, however, I tried to bring a little bit of interiority into it, a little bit of uh, deeply felt emotional thought. So it was about a man rather, whose mother is um, dying, and he's just writing this letter to the mother. Obviously, he's either putting it down on paper or he's thinking about it. But this is a letter that she will never get to see. Therefore, these are his deep, thoughts. These are his, you know, dilemmas that he's not being able to voice very openly. But these are things that are going through his mind. So the reason why there's a emotional touch to it and it has more interiority is because the letter is never going to be read by the mother. But I actually feel that this was one story that this one flash piece that I thought didn't um, it doesn't really reflect what I usually write. So it was
Mhm.
something very different, very visceral, something that I don't think I could write again. It was something that it was a spur of the moment reaction to prompt an idea, a thought. So yeah.
It was definitely a beautiful piece and a very emotional one, of course.
Thank you.
Uh, Now, I want to know that as a writer, you have gone through various phases of writing, editing, and publishing. And as you said, you have around 11 years of experience in this field.
Yeah, about 11 years. Yeah.
So, now what is that one advice, or it could be more than one, that you would like to give to the young emerging writers through our platform?
Well, primarily, there will be people who will judge you. There will be people who will try to get you not to write. But don't listen to anyone. Always take criticism with a pinch of salt because every criticism has its own basis. Sometimes that basis can be completely flawed. Always respect people's criticism of your work, but always understand that um, you put this down on paper, it's your work, and there is a reader for what you've written. It's very easy to dismiss someone's work, but it's very difficult to accept them. So always remember to take criticism with a pinch of salt.
All right. Now, before we conclude our session, I would really like to know about some of the books that you read, some of the writers that you read. What is your experience with reading? Because reading has a very important part in writing.
So I ended up reading a lot of South Asian literature uh, for many, many, many years. And whether it was Indian writers, Pakistani writers, these were books that really defined a lot for me. They've sort of helped
Mhm.
me form my imagination as a writer. So I think write and read, read what you want to write eventually. That's what I like to
Mhm.
say. Read everything, read what you can, but
Mhm.
sometimes if you want to write about a certain kind of reality, read about it, read omnivorously. But I would recommend read as much as you can. And there is a trend over time, I've realized. I mean, I've been reading South Asian literature for a very long time, and I've concluded that people don't know much about South Asian literature. And at the same time, people don't want to understand much about South Asian literature. They have these preconceived notions about how South Asian writing is inferior because it's not um, classical English writing. But I would recommend read it and understand where it's coming from. It's not the same as, a book by a white author, but it's got some merit to it. So that's what I say. Just keep reading what you can, but read what you want to write. And at the same time, write what you don't see on the bookshelf. So, yeah. Thank
All
you.
right, that's a very good advice. So finally, how will you please tell us what do you think about the bridge as a project which is aiming at connecting writers from around the world with its competitions and different things that are coming?
See, at a time like this, when creative endeavors are already under threat, such initiatives are welcome. They're always going to be valuable. See, at a time like this, the pandemic has paralyzed the publishing industry pretty much around the world. Everybody is suffering. Everybody is going through a dry spell creatively. Therefore, an initiative like the Bridge is really going to open doors for people and offer encouragement. And without that encouragement, you'll have a lot of people who want to write, but they don't see any space to write. They don't see any recognition. And I think the Bridge is doing one thing, it's providing recognition. And with the recently revamped website, I see a lot of people engaging with one another. Community of writers is building up. And I think that is what people need to do. We need to develop communities because writers support each other. Reality is that the writers will support each other at all points in time. They will always understand why when you get a bad review. Honestly, the best thing to do is if you ever get a bad review or a terrible um, critique from anyone, you run to a writer and you say they've said this about my work, and they will read your work and they will understand. There will be sympathy, there will be empathy. So I think a community of writers is a flourishing community that is necessary, and the Bridge is providing that platform. So yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Taha. It was a pleasure having you. It was a pleasure having
Pleasure
this
being
discussion.
here. Thank you so much.
All right, so I hope that all of you have enjoyed listening to Taha's view on creativity. And now before we sign out, I would like to tell you that if you're an amateur writer, you are a writer in the making, The Bridge would like to take you further in your creative ventures as you would not be able to connect with the entire world except for this website. So you will be getting feedback on your work, you will be getting published, and there are so many opportunities that are going to be open for you. And if you happen to be a published writer, this is exactly where you're supposed to be because we are trying to connect you all over the world. So join us to see what people of similar creative stature and writing careers are aspiring to achieve in other parts of the world, and you can join hands with Bridge team to contribute to the literature of your part. As Taha said, that we should write things which are not on the shelf. So I think the Bridge is one of the platforms which is providing you that just on a click away, just a click away. So the link of our website is also given in the description below. It is www.bridgethenations.com. Stay tuned for more interesting interactions with our renowned writers. Take care. Thank you so much.